it's been quite an adventure in the last 10 years,
The
hasn't it?
last 10 years has been absolutely crazy, yeah. Um, like it's one of those things where sometimes people go, "Oh yeah, like what are your goals with the band?" And like I always say, like my goals with the band were probably reached about 9.5 years ago.
Yeah,
And everything like since then has just been an extra bonus, you know. Um, like we like seven or 8 years ago, say after we did like the Jules Holland thing, which seems like ages ago now. Like even that, I felt at that time I was like, this is crazy. I never thought the band would get this far, you know. And it just feels like every year since then, it's kind of been like just stepping up another notch, you know, just in terms of the amount of people that are getting into the band or like the size of the venues that we're playing. Like the whole operation is just absolutely massive in a way that like I'm not sure I would have chosen for myself to be honest, but I kind of feel like we're on this ride now, you know, so just trying to enjoy it and trying to get what we can from it, you know.
yeah, because you're very much from almost like an underground sort of squat punk culture, aren't you? So it's sort of like
Yeah.
you've gate crashed a completely different world, isn't it?
Yeah, in a way, it feels like, you know, it was never our plan or our intention. It feels like it's kind of happened and we've gone, okay, so let's just see where it goes and let's see how far we can take it now. And it's like it feels like a massively enjoyable adventure. And also it kind of just feels like we've nothing to lose, you know? We've nothing to lose at all. It came from absolutely nothing. So like yeah, it's nice like, you know, in terms of even False Lankum, which came out last year, I think we were all prepared for the people to absolutely hate that. You know, we felt like it was our most uncompromising album to date, and we were ready. We're like, yeah, like I think most people who are into our band up till now are gonna absolutely hate this album, and we're here for it. You know, let's go. And then next thing you know, it seems like more people than ever are into it, which is very strange, but really heartening for me to see that you can still make the music you want. And, you know, you're not trying to compromise or you're not trying to shape it to anybody else's idea of what the music should be. And people will respond to that. You know, that will resonate with people. And you can, you know, be in a very successful band and still make the music that you want to make.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's a kind of cliche words, but very timeless. And I think what you've done is quite interesting. Is you taken that kind of your roots in an underground kind of music culture, underground kind of punk culture, but taking it back about 500 years, so tapped into something very mystical, very eternal as well, and made it work. Because that's a lot of people try and do that, but they come up with a very cliche version of it. But you've managed to make something sound contemporary and ancient at the same time.
Yeah, well, I think it's been a long time coming, and I think I'm not really a fan of, you know, music that very like self-consciously tries to fuse different genres, you know, in a way where it's almost like before they set out as a band, they're like, oh, we're going to start a band that combines elements of jazz and neo folk or whatever the genres are, you know. I've never really warmed to that kind of music. It's a little bit it doesn't really feel like it comes from the heart for me, you know. But I think for us, it's taken a long time to kind of get where we are now. And, you know, obviously, if you listen to like Cold Old Fire, it's very much more a straight up folk album in a lot of ways. I think the whole journey, like for me, I can't speak for the others in the band, but for me personally, the journey of Lankum has kind of gone in tandem with my own internal like wrestling with like my love for traditional music and my love for other like more extreme forms of music that I've been into for much longer, and trying to find a way to synthesize those influences where they don't, you know, because when I first got into traditional music, like it felt like such a separate thing to me to the other types of music that I was into, you know. I was, you know, whether it was like forms of like extreme metal or punk or hardcore or whatever, you know, it was always very forward looking music. And then next of all, I found myself being really drawn towards like Irish traditional music, which by its very nature is a conservative culture, is trying to conserve elements from the past. So even ideologically speaking, not just like musically speaking, it's very far away. Ideologically speaking, it felt very far away as well. So it's kind of taken me a long time to figure out where are the areas where those two kind of worlds can coexist. And I think that's what we've been trying to explore with Lankum. And it feels like we're getting closer and closer to the truth all the time, but it's like a process of constant exploration.
I mean, what was the tipping point when when you discovered the older musics and also discovered there was a resonance in that music that actually made sense?
Like I mean, a big moment for me was coming across Planksty. Like hearing the music of Planksty was like it blew my mind wide open. I'd already been into stuff like the Dubliners and the Pogues, and that was just a kind of like the Pogues were really like a part of the furniture when I was growing up. They were on the radio when I was a kid. My aunties and uncles would be singing like Pogue songs at family gatherings, just mixed in with the rest of the stuff they were singing. And so that like the Pogues kind of felt like they were always there, but so there was never any big breakthrough moment. I was just always kind of really into them. But with Planksty, I think somebody showed me the first Planksty album when I was about 18, and like that was a really like a massive eye opener. And so I was kind of like I sat with Planksty for a few years and other groups in a similar kind of vein, like Sweeney's Men and the Botty Band and stuff. And then like I really started getting into just like solo traditional playing. Like when I started to learn the uilleann pipes, I started just to listen to straight up traditional recordings of solo uilleann pipers, and that was another like big breakthrough moment. Um, and it's something I just kind of found myself being really drawn towards. And at that point in time, there was no one really that I knew who was into that kind of music. There was no one around me, and people just like, oh, like they'd hear what I was listening to and just not really get it at all. Because I think if you don't really have any exposure to instrumental Irish music, it can all just kind of sound the same. Like any kind of genre of music, if you're not really well versed, if you haven't kind of trained your ears to the sound, a lot of it just kind of sounds the same from the outside. It takes a while to kind of internalize the sounds, and you kind of, your ears tune into it a little bit, and then you can really hear what's going on behind the kind of outer, like, don't want to call it noise, but the outer sounds that your ears will first pick up on takes you just a while to kind of move past them. Then you start to hear the differences between the tunes and the differences between the tune types and the internal melody. And for me, that's the same, whether it's like black metal or traditional Irish music or classical music or anything, just it takes a bit of time to kind of tune your ears to it. So that's a bit of the process as well.
But do you think there's a commonality between, say, punk, black metal, extreme types of metal, and folk music as well? I mean, sometimes thematically they cross over, but is there a resonance? Do you feel the same from those musics, or do they feel completely different?
I think there are times, I mean, I find like I find all those types of music to be like very uplifting in different ways. Like punk, like black metal, like they're really like soaring, like blast beat melodies with like very emotive kind of riffs that you hear in black metal, and like a set of reels in the pubs. To me, that's like very uplifting and life affirming music. And it's absolutely like there in the energy of punk as well. Um, and I mean, I've talked a lot before about the parallels that I've kind of seen between like DIY punk culture and like the session culture, where you would hear traditional Irish music played in pubs, just in the corner of a pub, people playing music for the love of it, and kind of how much that has in common with like DIY underground punk culture as well. Um, but on a musical level, I mean, I think it's there on a kind of thematic level. I think it's there with a lot of the kind of, I mean, there's so many different strands in traditional Irish song. Like there's traditional songs for every aspect of life that you can care to think of. But I think the one strand of traditional song that's there's a lot of songs that were written like in the 20th century, really, a lot of songs connected to like the miners' strikes in England, or like labor songs from the United States, like the whole Woody Guthrie thing. and the Dubliners and Christy Moore would have been into, a lot of that kind of stuff. And so I think like hearing this, I mean, protest music is the kind of general term, protest songs and protest music. I think that's there in a very big way in like the folk world. But I mean, it's also, it's like punk or reggae or anything like that, it's all protest music.
Mm. And you
Um,
did it.
I think
And you did
that's
a
another
very
pattern
yeah.
between
You did a
them.
very. I mean, you did a very deep dive into this because you looked into the histories of these songs, haven't you? You've gone right back in time. This is not the surface. You've done the detail, haven't you?
Yeah, well, I do a podcast, Fire Draw Near, where I'll like take a traditional song and I'll kind of look into the history and the background of it, like an hour long episode usually, for individual songs. But I've like I used to lecture in university here in Dublin, in University College Dublin, and did a course on traditional music and song, and did another course on the history of collecting traditional material. So it's something I have like a you could say I have like an academic interest in as well, like the whole history of traditional music and song, where it stems from, the kind of social history of singing, like all these different aspects. It's all really, really fascinating stuff. And it's something that we try to, I suppose, impart with the band in terms of like the liner notes and stuff we make. 'Cause I just think it's a kind of an important part for me, but also like when I was picking up records by Planksty and groups like that, the liner notes were something that really helped me kind of get deeper into the tradition. I know it's different now because you can kind of just find everything online. It wasn't really the case when I was getting into it, but I think just like a good LP package and good liner notes are always good.
Mm. I mean, do you think that sense of storytelling is key to this, and also key to what you do with Lankum as well?
I think it is because it really like it's a big part of the atmosphere and the kind of vibe of what you're trying to get across, it kind of like it all the storytelling aspect just kind of adds to the mystique, and it adds to the just the kind of atmosphere and the whole ambience surrounding uh this kind of music. It's just I suppose part of the vibe, as it were.
I mean, a lot of the storytelling. I mean, it's not specifically a snapshot of that moment in time, is it? They're like eternal stories, eternal themes that can run through generations, aren't they? Which you've kind of proven with Lankum as well.
Yeah, I think so. Like I think I mean it's similar when you look at like folklore narratives and folklore stories, they're like you wouldn't really look at them for historical veracity, but what they do show you in a stronger way is how people, not exactly what happened at this point in time, but how people were feeling at this point in time. And I think that traditional song, if you look at traditional songs from a certain era, they can open up like the emotional reality of people living through that time. People who were maybe illiterate, people who didn't leave written records, people who, for all intents and purposes, don't appear in the official mainstream historical record. They're just not there. But when we look at these songs, we can find out what they were feeling and what they were going through. And I don't think there's any other record, historically speaking, that we can look to for that. And I find that really, really fascinating. I mean, even if we don't know who wrote these songs, if we can see that people were singing this song at a certain time, we can say, okay, we know that this song must have been popular around this point in time because it was printed on ballad sheets or whatever. So we know that this song was resonating with people for that time, around that time. Um, it's Yeah, I just think it's a really amazing subject, but there's so many facets of it that you can, I mean, spend your life researching it as well.
Yeah. Mm.
Never exhaust what's out there. There's always more information being uncovered, and there's a really interesting kind of online subculture of like absolute nerds for this kind of stuff as well, which I enjoy dipping into. Because of the band and what the band is doing, I haven't really been able to like continue with my studies and research. Like I was about to do a PhD before Lankum kind of took off, and I had a supervisor ready to go, and that was the kind of direction I was going in. And then Lankum just got like kind of much more, say, popular and much busier than we had been expecting. So I ended up just deciding, yeah, we'll just, I'll go with Lankum for the moment. Like academia isn't going anywhere, and I can
Mm,
always come back to that.
mm,
But I really enjoy having the podcast to be able to like kind of just scratch that itch as well. It really helps in that way. But yeah, I think it's a really fascinating subject and a big part of what we do at Lankum. Like, I mean, the music is one thing, but also just being able to like spread and share our enthusiasm for songs and to try and like just let people know, yeah, hey, maybe are you into this thing? Well, this is a way to get into it.
mm, mm. But also, not doing it, presenting as a museum piece. I think that's the real crux of what you do here. It's tapping into the feel of this music and it's tapping into the ideas of it. But it sounds very much of the now. I mean, a lot of this music was not urban, was it? It was out in the countryside. It was tiny villages or people just sitting in the forest. But you're doing it in a city way and with modern sounds. And it kind of, like I said before, it sounds ancient and contemporary at the same time, which is a really difficult thing to pull off. I mean, is that something you have to think about a lot, or is it just something that just kind of happens because you're so immersed in the culture anyway?
I think once you make the decision that like you want to make music that makes sense to you, like I think we could all go and just, we could have been content in playing traditional music in a traditional way and going to sessions and playing in a very traditional way in sessions. And that's brilliant. And there's people who are doing that to a very you know, like high degree, really amazing players, amazing singers. But I think for us, it's really important that what we're doing like really means something to us. And it's like it kind of has to be in line with our own inner musical reality. For me and art, like my inner musical reality is made up of all different kinds of things and all different kind of influences. And so the music that I make has to incorporate all those things, or else I'm gonna feel alienated. I'm gonna feel like I'm playing somebody else's music, or I'm kind of conforming to somebody else's vision of what my music should be. So it's very important for me to, and everybody in the band, I think it's okay if I speak for them on this, to play music that like just makes sense to us. And it might not make sense to everybody else because people have different influences as they grow up. People come across different things, different styles of music mean more to other people for emotional reasons or for, political reasons or whatever. But for us, this is our very distinct vision of music. And I
Mm,
mean, I think once you decide that you're going to do that and you're going to do that without making apologies or making excuses to anybody, yeah, it's just a very natural thing, really. I don't think we worry about it too much. I think if yeah, if we did worry about it, no, we just haven't. We just haven't.
yeah.
Because I think it is the thing. Sometimes if you're too involved in the like traditional scene, you can worry about, oh, if I do this thing, maybe it's gonna piss off some people. Or, but I think for us, that moment is long gone. It's a long time since we would have worried about anything like that.
Which is always the best way to make music. But interesting. What do the purists think of it? What do the what do the people from the folk scene or the traditional music scenes think of what you do now? And I imagine some embrace it and some find it a little confusing, or do they all think this is great that you've kind of twisted it and made a 21st century version of it?
Um, well, the interesting thing is that we've always had like a lot of support from like the kind of more dyed in the wool traditional people, which I've always been kind of surprised by. And even as our music has progressed, I think it seems now maybe like they're not mad into our music, but they're always still very supportive. Um,
Mm,
whenever I am chatting with anybody from that world, or whenever I come across anybody, they're always full of like just it's great, saying it's great to see us out doing what we're doing. And I mean, even if they're not into the music, I think they realize that it is like drawing people into the tradition. And you can see that now. I mean, I'm not saying it's not just because of Lankum, because there's quite a few people who are operating in a similar way now and similar artists, but just the general vibe is such that there are new people coming into sessions all the time. Like there are regular singing sessions in Dublin. Like there's a weekly one, there's a different monthly one. And if I go to one of them now, I see like lots of new young people that I never saw before. And I think for a long time before that, there was no new people coming in. Like for 20, 25 years, there was no new people coming in. And I know that before the new generation of singers got involved in this scene, people were worried that it was going to die out with them. You know, they thought they were the last generation. And in the last 10 years, there's been such a resurgence. I think people are really amazed and feel, really confident that it's going to carry on. And I think they realize that, a big part of it is like the bands that are playing now who are incorporating traditional music into what they do. That they are drawing people into the tradition. There's not everybody's going to get into it, but a lot of people are going to listen to it and they're going to go, "Oh, this is cool. Like, where does this come from?" Or this reminds me of when I was young. I heard my parents and my grandparents singing songs like this. I want to find out more about it. So they find out where there's the session going on, and then they go to a session, and then they start learning more songs themselves. And so I think it's all part of it. And I think there's, you know, probably people out there who aren't happy with it, and probably people who hate it, but they have been, like, luckily for us, they have not been as vocal as the people who are supportive of us. I imagine they're out there, but they're just maybe keeping it to themselves a little bit
So,
more.
so these sessions in the pubs, these are key for your road here, aren't they? Your um, for the journey you've been on, aren't they? Because you went to these sessions earlier on, didn't you, when you were trying to find the music? And I mean, they do go in the UK. Even like my local pub has one. They actually reinstated it recently, and it's just the old guys playing the bodhrans, and people bring any instruments down they want and play something within the idea of Irish music. Because Irish music always felt quite fluid to me. It's very traditional. It's set. It's got a long history, but you can actually do what you wanted with it and play it any way you wanted. And that felt like the pub. So was it similar back in Ireland as well, or was it tied down to more of a tradition because you're actually in Ireland, or less of a tradition because it was more confident because it's actually in the country where it came from?
Well, I think it can vary a lot from session to session. Sometimes you'll go to a session and it's like a kind of free for all, and people are like
Hmm.
just doing what they want to do, and they might sing a song they wrote themselves, or they might sing a song that's not traditional or whatever, and then you might go to another one and it's very traditional, and the players are like, really high quality players who are, playing in a very like traditional way, and the singers might be very, serious about what they're doing and they will only like have traditional Irish singing there or whatever. It can vary quite a lot. And I mean, like, musically speaking, I like being at the more purist sessions, because the music is just at such a high degree. It's really amazing. That's where you really learn, is by listening to like traditional music played well. But then again, like, the kind of more free for all like sessions can be just more crazy and just way more crack, when you're there. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard to know. So I'd say a bit of both, But like, for me, like, the sessions in the pubs, that's really where the music lives, that's where it's based, that's where it belongs. Um, I don't think I don't think true Irish music, like what we're doing, isn't like proper traditional music. What we're doing is something, I'd say, like, traditional music is an element of our sound. It's a very strong element, but it is just an element amongst others. But if you wanted to hear proper traditional music, like, I'd say to anybody, like, go to a session in a pub where there's good musicians. Like, that's really where it should be experienced.
So when you initially went to the sessions, would you go as a listener or would you go as a partaker? And would you bring your guitar down, or would you just sort of stamp your feet on the floor, or join in, or nod your head, or I mean, or was it different
Um,
every time? Yeah.
I- I'd say I would have just kind of gone down and listened at first, and then I probably would have started off, like, the first kind of few times I would have, like, partaken in a session anyway. I probably would have, like, been singing a song, you know, um, like, just like singing a traditional song, like, a cappella. And then after I started to learn the uilleann pipes then. So after I was learning the pipes for a couple of years, I would have started bringing them to sessions and like playing traditional tunes on the pipes. Um, and it's interesting over here because I think in a lot of ways the kind of the traditional singing world and the like kind of the instrumental world of traditional music were like quite separate in a lot of ways. Like the sessions, they would have had like singing sessions and music sessions, and it wasn't, they didn't really like kind of mix that much. Like the musicians used to get a bit pissed off with the singers because they're like, oh, they take too long and the songs are too long. And the singers be like, oh, if we go down to the like the musician session and we start singing a song, they all just go out for a smoke and whatever. So there's a little bit of a
Yeah.
divide there, but it seems like that's something that's hasn't really continued like with the younger generation. Like a lot of the sessions I see now, it seems to be like a good healthy mix between the two. So that's really cool to see.
It's interesting that your choice of instrument was the pipes. I mean, was that because you like the sound of it, or you're interested in them, or is it something about the drone of the pipes that actually made sense to you from the drone of, like, say, black metal? Because that does work on the drone as well, doesn't it? The mystical drone.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that the drone of the pipes is definitely the first thing that I kind of was drawn to. It was actually like there's a scene, the first scene in The Wicker Man, um, obviously the 1973 version, where
Yeah.
Sergeant Pepper is flying in on the little biplane and the pipes come in there. You hear the drones just coming in like
Mm.
kind of mixes in with the drone of the propellers on the airplane. And so I heard that instrument, and I actually thought that that was the uilleann pipes when I heard it first, but only later realized that it's the Northumbrian small pipes, which is a
Mm.
similar instrument but quite different. But I think I heard that, and I was just like, oh, fuck, dog, I want to play that instrument. So it was almost an accident how I started getting into the uilleann pipes. But I think I had it in my head. I remember being a teenager and having it in my head that I really wanted to play like the Scottish Highland pipes and talking to friends about it, and they were going, why would you want to learn the Scottish pipes? Do you not know that there's Irish pipes? And I was like, what are you talking about? And they're like, yeah, the Irish pipes, they're called the uilleann pipes. And I was just like, oh, really like fascinated by this idea before I'd even heard them. But just heard like the drone as it comes in on the Wicker Man and presumed that that was the uilleann pipes. I mean, it's not, the sound of the uilleann pipes isn't too far off, but it's quite different. But yeah, like I'd say the drone was a big aspect of the sound that kind of drew me to it. And also I just thought it was a really like there's just a certain mystique to the instrument, you know. It's one of the only like native Irish instruments, like the pipes and the harp, or a particular development of the harp are the only native Irish instruments. Like everything else has been imported, fiddle, accordion, concertina, they're all like brought in from other countries, you know. Um, but the pipes, I mean, they're a very difficult instrument to learn. Like it took me like a long time before I could really like do anything musical sounding on them. Like I was living with some people when I started to learn them, and they still kind of remind me of it now. It's like 20 years ago, but they'd still be like, "Oh, I remember you were learning the pipes." There was like, I'd have to do like finger exercises where I would just be going like boop, 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 like for hours at a time, and they'd be like, oh, it sounds like a truck reversing outside or whatever, like stuff
Yeah.
like that. But they were patient enough, luckily, and I eventually broke through and got to a stage where I could make something that resembled music on them. So,
I had a friend who actually made Northumbrian pipes. It's like a
oh no way.
7 year course. So you talk about the history of it, and I knew a bit of the history. They're actually from Morocco originally, aren't they? And that's where bagpipes come from. They're part of that family. But are the Irish pipes from the same family, or is it just like a weird convergent evolution?
It's part of the same family. I mean, I think all bagpipes. There's bagpipes from nearly every country in Europe, you know, and it all probably goes back to the same source. Um, like I heard as well that the Launeddas in Sicily are like maybe a very early kind of like iteration of the same thing, you know, but they would have been obviously like using their cheeks as the bag and just blowing into these little pipes.
Mm.
But yeah, like so the uilleann pipes, they would have been a result. So there was like Irish war pipes. There's like engravings of them from the 1500s and stuff. They would have been used in battle, like the way the Scottish Highland pipes are. And then the Uilleann pipes were a later development. They were made, they're like more of a genteel kind of instrument. They were made to be played indoors and played for dancers, just a more kind of delicate, more musical instrument, than the war pipes. But yeah, definitely very much part of the same family of instruments.
What I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned across Europe, the pipes there, and it's also across Europe. There is, I mean, this is not everybody, but there is an interest in the folk roots of all the countries and crisscrossing it with like more modern styles, isn't there? I mean, none of these bands I've ever heard ever sound anything like what you're doing, but there is people working that process. Like, if I go to Estonia, I'll see people using Estonian folk music and mixing it with techno or punk rock, like with their weird little pipes. And so it's one thing that is there like in a say a high tech modern time, people trying to find the roots, or just because it just sounds good.
Like I think yeah, it's definitely part of a general kind of movement, and I even see it like in the States, like my partner lives in New Orleans, and when I go down to New Orleans, all the punks down there are mad into country music, like like really mad into country music. It's all they play, and I kind of see like a movement. I mean, it's like probably over the last 10, 15, 20 years, people going back to kind of more like traditional kind of styles of music and, kind of growing an interest in styles of music where there's kind of these scenes popping up where they'll have the same like kind of ideals and the same ideas as like DIY punk or whatnot, but it's the musical styles are more veering towards like traditional and folk kind of things. And I think, I mean, it's just like reaction against modern mainstream culture, I think people are just hungering for something that's just more substantial and it means something more than like what's on offer, I think there's just a dart of like just culture in the mainstream world that will leave you feeling nourished. I always say it's kind of akin to like eating food at McDonald's, you buy it and it's
Yeah,
kind of it's trashy and cheap and you're kind of still hungry afterwards,
yeah, yeah,
kind of,
yeah,
like mainstream pop music or whatever. I mean, I like some kinds of pop music, my son listens to a lot of it. I'm not totally against modern culture or anything, but I just think that people are left feeling like they want something more, and the answer for them is to turn to like older forms of music, and more like traditional and folk forms of music, and it's kind of music that has withstood the test of time, like you were saying about a timeless quality to the music. It's kind of passed a certain test, because it's never had the kind of the it's never had any help from any like mainstream kind of music industry or system. It's just lasted simply because it's good music. Like songs have lasted because they have something in them that will resonate with anybody from any generation. They've passed through time, they've passed through space, and they've gone through so many people. They've like entered people's heads and they've been sung by people who've changed them in little bits along the way. And so they've kind of, in a lot of cases, just been distilled down, like folklorists talk about this process whereby in items of folklore, the things that don't make sense to people or the things that don't work, they'll just be forgotten and lost. A person will learn a song if there's a verse in it that they don't like or a verse in it that was maybe badly written or didn't make sense, they'll just leave it out when they sing it,
yeah.
and then somebody else along the line might write their own verse or write their own couple of lines that will be really good. So the next person will keep them. So by the time you pass through 200 or 300 years, you have like this gem of a song that's like probably different in a lot of ways than the original item was, Um, so I
So
think
it's
that
got a fluidity, and it just
yeah,
the core of the idea is there, but it just kind of gets molded in the times. That's the power of it,
yeah,
isn't it?
absolutely, and that's how folklore works, and I think that's why a lot of the songs when they come down to us in this day and age, they just have so much power there, There's so much to them. in a way that you could never like really replicate if you could get the best songwriters to be like, okay, write me a song that has that power and they could do it, but it just hasn't gone through that process. So it's not going to have the same, I don't what the word I'm looking for is, like the same, it's a power, but it's something I don't, I can't think of a word that would suit what I'm trying,
Yeah.
you know what I'm trying to.
I know it's another gist. Yeah, I interviewed Shirley Collins, and she said folk music, like English folk music, which obviously she deals with, but specifically from Sussex, it actually comes from the soil of England, and I love that idea that no matter what you try and sound like, you can't you can only sound like what you are, you know. So in a sense, that's what you are, isn't it? You start off trying to do rock or whatever, but somehow the mystical the soil of Ireland and that spirit is just going to seep into you anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I realized that like whatever kind of projects I have, like like in metal projects or like ambient projects, stuff I'm working on now, it always has the same kind of elements in it, but it's just maybe like different, you know, 20%, two parts of this and three parts of this. But in Lankum, it's obviously like the folk and traditional kind of elements are there to a stronger degree. But yeah, like I was saying, you can't really, well, I feel like we can't really help it, we just make the music that we make and try to be as like the only thing that we're trying to stay true to in making our music is ourselves and what we feel is good music and what means something to us. And I think that's the kind of guiding light that you need to have when you're working, you just need to be authentic to yourself. That's all. Not to anybody else's idea of what
Mm.
the tradition should be or anybody else's idea of what your music should be. Because sometimes I think that can happen with bands as well, whereby like the fans of the band, have an idea of what the band should be doing and you can feel the pressure of that sometimes. But I think you should always just remain true to yourself at the end of the day.
I've only got a minute left on here, but I was just wondering, by doing this, the music and exploring that traditional Irishness, does it, and the folk music, does it change your aspect of Irishness? Does it give you a different slant on it?
I think so, yeah. I think Irishness is such a funny and nebulous concept, and it's something that I've kind of been struggling with, since I was very young. Um, like just trying to find out what it's all about and what does it mean to be Irish, because growing up in Ireland, we have a lot of baggage as like, a post-colonial country, people who are like we a lot of times can't speak our own language, but we have a lot of ideas about it, and there's just really so much baggage there, and trying to sort through all that and try and figure it out. Like when I was growing up and I was a teenager, I really had like a lot of problems. I hated anything to do with Irishness and